It was a bright spring morning in Bloomsbury Square, and the air outside the drawing-room window shimmered with sunlight and fresh blooms. But inside the parlour of her aunt's tall, narrow townhouse, Tabitha Granger stood stiffly by the pianoforte, tugging at the cuffs of her washed-out muslin gown. "Do stand up straighter, girl," Aunt Euphemia barked from her settee without lifting her gaze from the embroidery in her lap. "You'll never attract a suitor slouched like a beetle." Tabitha obeyed, shoulders drawing back like marionette strings. Her neck ached already. "And that hair," her aunt went on, peering at her through narrowed eyes. "A shade of mud, and not a curl to be seen. No wonder. No one looked twice at you in Bath. Plain as porridge, I've always said." "Yes, Aunt." Across the room, lounging against the settee's opposite arm, Cousin Lavinia let out a bright, tinkling laugh. She was draped in layers of pale blue gauze and pinned with too many ribbons, as though playing the part of an over-decorated confection. "Do let her be, Aunt," she said. "Tabby doesn't want to be admired. She's a wallflower by choice, you know. Some girls make their mark with beauty, others with invisibility." Tabitha flushed, lips pressing tightly together. Lavinia delighted in her digs, always spoken with a smile, always loud enough for the servants to hear. "I simply prefer quiet," Tabitha said softly. "You prefer not trying," Lavinia countered sweetly. Aunt Euphemia sighed. "If only you'd take half the effort Lavinia does. She'll have offers before the season's end, I've no doubt of it. That's what comes of taking one's appearance seriously. Not all girls can coast on good family." Good family, in this case, meant barely clinging to a name and fortune so frayed it might disintegrate if someone looked too hard. Tabitha said nothing. She drifted to the window and peered down at the park beyond. Children in white frocks chased hoops along the green. Young ladies in bonnets and walking gowns strolled arm in arm. Their laughter drifted up to her like the sound of a memory suite, light and slightly out of reach. It hadn't always been this way. Once, she'd run through fields in the country with a boy named Colin Hensley, trading daisy chains and ridiculous riddles. He'd been kind and funny and impossibly fair-haired. For a while, he'd made her feel quite visible indeed. But that had ended abruptly. It had been 2 years ago, at the Whitsun Fair in Dorsham. She remembered the heat of the day, the smell of cinnamon buns, the way her slippers sank slightly into the grass. She had stepped behind the main tent to avoid the crush of dancer sand that was when she'd heard them. Colin, laughing with 2 of his school friends. "Who's that?" one had asked, pointing toward the main pavilion. "Oh, her?" Colin had replied, not even bothering to lower his voice. "Just Tabitha Granger. Perfectly nice, perfectly forgettable." He had said it with a shrug. A boy's careless dismissal, flippant and effortless. She hadn't cried. Not then. But the words had taken root somewhere beneath her ribs and spread like ivy, creeping through every mirror glance and quiet moment since. "Tabitha!" Her aunt's voice dragged her back to the present. "You're daydreaming again. Do go fetch the post before Lavinia thinks to flutter down in full silk and startle the footman." Tabitha made her way to the door without protest, glad for the excuse to escape the room. In the hall, the butler handed her a small stack of letters. Most were for Aunt Euphemia, but one envelope lightly crumpled, addressed in sprawling script, bore her name. She blinked. From the Duchess of Corbridge. A name from her late mother's distant past, barely remembered from old stories of dances at Vauxhall and snowy rides in the Lake District. She opened it with trembling fingers. "My dear Miss Granger, word has reached me of your present situation in London, and I find myself most unsatisfied by the reports. Your mother was a dear friend to me once, and I will not see her daughter relegated to the shadows of society. You are to pack immediately. My carriage will arrive Thursday morning. I shall see to the rest. Sincerely, the Duchess of Corbridge. Tabitha stared. Was this a jest? A trap? Anything for me? Lavinia sang out from the drawing-room. Tabitha turned the letter over again. Wax seal, regal ink. No, it was real. She felt something strange stir in her chesticle parts, panic and relief. The Duchess of Corbridge. It was absurd, outrageous, impossible. But then again, so was remaining here listening to Lavinia chirp and Aunt Euphemia sigh, day after day, until she became exactly what they said she was, forgettable. She tucked the letter to her chest. Thursday could not come fast enough. Thursday dawned grey and drizzling, which suited Tabitha perfectly. She had risen at dawn, her small valise packed and repacked twice over. She had no fine trunk, no maid to prepare her gowns, just a careful folding of her few modest dresses, 2 well-worn books of verse, and the pressed marigold she kept tucked in a handkerchief. The flower was dry, fragile, its petals browned, but it reminded her of her mother and of herself. She lingered by the window, watching the rain bead on the sill. Would the Duchess truly come? At precisely 10:30, a dark green carriage rolled up to the townhouse like something from a fable. Gold trim winked at the corners, and the ducal crest 3 swans in flight gleamed on the door. A footman leapt down in full livery and rapped the brass knocker smartly. Tabitha's heart leapt and sank all at once. "You are leaving?" Aunt Euphemia repeated, as if the words were some foreign language. "With her?" Tabitha nodded. She was Mamma's friend. The Duchess of Corbridge is not in the habit of collecting country mice, Lavinia added archly from the stair. How curious. She wrote to me, Tabitha said quietly. She said she would see to the rest. What does that mean? Aunt Euphemia huffed. See to what? Tabitha hesitated. Everything, she wanted to say. Everything you've refused to see in me. She gave a small curtsy. Thank you for your kindness, Aunt. It was not returned. Minutes later, she stepped into the warmth of the carriage, the door clicking shut behind her like the closing of an old book. Across from her sat a woman who looked every inch the Duchess upright, cloaked in deep red velvet, feather hat, a gold brooch, and her own unshakable composure. Miss Granger, the Duchess said, studying her with shrewd grey eyes. You're thinner than I recall. Have they been starving you? Tabitha blinked. No, ma'am. You look starved. Starved of colour, of care, of purpose. She folded her hands. We shall fix that. Tabitha sat very still. Why? She asked softly. Why help me? The Duchess glanced out the window. Because your mother once dragged me from a lake when I fell through the ice, and I owe her more than you could imagine. And because I have no daughters of my own, and I'm in need of a challenge, you shall be my project. Tabitha's stomach twisted. I'm not sure I'm very good at being improved. Nonsense. Any girl can wear a gown, but wearing confidence, that takes structure, time, and the right materials. We'll see what you're made of. By the next day, she was installed in a sunlit guest chamber at Corbridge House, with ceilings high enough to hang clouds and a wardrobe the size of her old bedroom. And that was only the beginning. Within the week, Tabitha had met Madame Linnet, a French modiste with sharp eyes and sharper pins, Miss Grable, a former governess who now specialized in deportment, and Mr. Spencer, a gentleman poet who'd been bribed with wine and conversation to tutor her on verbal presence. There is nothing wrong with your mind, he said during their first lesson, only that you whisper your intelligence as if it's an apology. Tabitha flushed. I wasn't raised to speak boldly. No one is, he said with a crooked smile. Boldness must be chosen. Every morning began with posture practice. Shoulders back, chin high, eyes straight. Every afternoon brought fittings, lace samples, books on conversation, fan signals, and flower language. She wrote letters to Blythe in the evenings, half astonished, half amused by the absurdity of it all. Dearest Blythe, you would not believe it. I now own 3 gowns with actual boning, and not a single brown one among them. Apparently, I have been committing color crimes since birth. Who knew? But despite the bustle and silk and scents of rosewater and lavender, she sometimes caught herself in the mirror and frowned. Beneath the fashionable curls and coral lip stain, there still sat her. The same quiet girl who'd spent too many hours in corners, too many days holding her tongue. She didn't want to vanish behind feathers and fashion. She wanted to be seen and understood. One afternoon, as she turned from a particularly punishing lesson on gliding down staircases without looking at her feet, the Duchess called her into the library. "You're ready," she said, holding out a card. Tabitha read it aloud. "The Stanton Ball? It is the first great gathering of the season," the Duchess replied. "Old Lady Stanton invites half the ton and expects the other half to beg entry." Tabitha's throat went dry. Am I to attend?" "You are to shine," the Duchess corrected. "You'll wear the blue silk, the one with the pearl trim. It brings out your eyes." Tabitha ran a hand over her sleeve. "What if no one recognizes me?" "Good," said the Duchess. "They shouldn't." She stepped closer, her tone softening. "Tabitha, you have hidden for long enough. It is time to let the world reconsider you." "But what if I've changed on the outside only?" The Duchess gave a small, satisfied smile. "Then it is the world's turn to catch up. The Stanton Ball was everything a grand affair in London ought to be: crystal chandeliers, golden candlelight, and an endless sea of silk, diamonds, and speculation." Tabitha stepped from the carriage like a stranger to herself. Her gown, trimmed in seed pearls, shimmered with every movement. Her hair, drawn into artful curls, framed her face with deliberate softness. She wore long gloves and carried a fan tipped with mother of pearl. Even her shoes sparkled faintly. But it wasn't the dress that made her tremble as she entered the gilded ballroom. It was the expectation. "Chin up," the Duchess of Corbridge whispered beside her, nodding with approval. "Smile like you know a secret, and for heaven's sake, don't cling to the wall." Tabitha nodded once and let herself be swept into the light. Eyes turned. She heard whispers begin almost instantly. "Who is that charming girl in blue?" "No, I don't think she's been out before." "Must be new money, or a foreigner." But no one said, "That's Tabitha Granger." No one looked and remembered. She'd expected to feel proud. Instead, she felt unmoored. This glittering version of herself moved differently, spoke differently, was treated differently, and not one person seemed to know they'd once passed her by. Until, "Miss Granger?" Tabitha turned. Colin Hensley stood before her, one brow arched, his glass of champagne frozen halfway to his lips. For a moment, they simply stared at one another. He looked just as she rememberedly taller, broader, more refined. His hair was still honey brown and slightly unruly, his eyes still a startling green. But the boyishness had faded, replaced by a man's sharper edge and tailored formality. His cravat alone was a work of architectural precision. She opened her mouth and then closed it again. He took a step closer. "It is you, isn't it?" Tabitha inclined her head slightly. "Indeed, Mr. Hensley." There was something odd in his expression, half confusion, half disbelief. "Forgive me, I didn't recognize you at first." You've changed." Tabitha smiled, but it didn't quite reach her eyes. "Have I?" "Quite dramatically. Most people don't notice me either way." Colin blinked. "That's not, I didn't mean." She offered her gloved hand. "Shall we dance?" He hesitated a heartbeat too long before taking it. They joined the waltz. The music swelled. bodies moved in fluid arcs. Her slippered feet glided across the floor, but the silence between them was louder than the orchestra. Finally, he spoke. "You've become quite the sensation, Miss Granger." "I wasn't aware." "Well, I've heard your name twice in the last 15 minutes, both times from gentlemen." "Oh?" she replied lightly. "And did they find me remarkable?" He nearly stumbled. Tabitha's voice softened, though her smile remained. "Apologies. That was unkind." Colin glanced at her, the corners of his mouth tight. "You remember. Some words are difficult to forget." His jaw tensed. "It was a foolish thing to say. Yes, I was young. We both were." The music turned them. Her skirts swirled gently between them like a veil. "I never meant to hurt you," he said quietly. Tabitha searched his face. "Then why did it take seeing me in pearls and powder for you to speak to me at all?" Colin didn't answer. When the dance ended, he released her hand carefully, as though it might vanish. "May I call on you?" She tilted her head, voice level. "That depends." "On what?" "Whether the gentleman who calls knows who I am, not who I look like." She curtsied and turned away before he could respond. She didn't glance back, but if she had, she would have seen Colin Hensley standing very still among the swirling dancers, brow furrowed, as if trying to solve a puzzle he should have known by heart. Later that evening, she passed him in the corridor near the refreshment tables. He was speaking to another man, a friend, by the look of him. Neither saw her. "You're certain?" the friend asked. Colin nodded slowly. "Tabitha Granger, from Dorsham. I can't believe it." "She's the one you?" "Yes, but she's completely different now." "You like her?" Colin paused. "I did once. I think I still might." His friend snorted. "Then dance again. Say something clever. Try not to offend her this time." Colin gave a rueful smile. "I don't think cleverness will help." Tabitha turned quietly away before they noticed her. She felt suddenly cold beneath her pearls. That night, back at Corbridge House, she sat in front of the mirror long after the pins had been removed from her hair. She studied the reflection in silence. "They all see the change," she thought. "But do they see me, the girl she had been, the one with crooked hems and hands inked from too much reading?" Still lived behind her eyes. But she wasn't sure anyone could see her now, not even Colin. Especially not Colin. It was the second waltz of the evening, and Tabitha hadn't expected to dance it, least of all with Colin Hensley. But there he was again, bowing stiffly. "Miss Granger, might I claim this dance?" She hesitated. It would be easier to say no, easier to retreat behind her fan and float to a safer corner of the ballroom. But easy had never remade anyone. "You may," she said at last, her voice neutral. He offered his arm. She took it lightly, carefully, as though it might burn. They stepped into the swirl of music, finding the rhythm together. They'd danced when they were children, back when she'd followed him around the village fair, too shy to say much, too hopeful to stay away. Colin cleared his throat. "You dance very well." "I've had practice," she replied, keeping her gaze on the chandelier. "Not just skill," he said. "Grace, confidence. Strange, I don't recall inspiring much of either before." He flinched. "You are determined to punish me, I see." Tabitha looked at him then, eyes sharp. "Not punish, simply clarify." A beat passed. "Clarify what?" "That you remember me only because I am now dressed to be remembered." His expression tightened. "That isn't fair." "No," she said, tilting her head. "Then perhaps remind me, Mr. Hensley, when was the last time you spoke to me before last night?" He didn't answer. "Exactly," she murmured. The music pulled them closer, and for a moment neither spoke. Around them, glittering couples laughed and whispered. but between them stretched an aching silence. "I did remember you," he said finally, his voice low. "The moment I heard your name, it unsettled me. Because I've changed. Because I hadn't," he said. That gave her pause. Their hands met in a turn, and for a heartbeat she saw something raw in his face, no embarrassment, but regret. "You must know," he said. "I never truly meant what I said back then. I was an arrogant boy, trying to impress my friends. It was cruel, I know that." Tabitha's voice stayed level. Words still cut, whether they're flung or fumbled. "I never forgot you," he said. "Then why do you look at me like I'm someone new?" Colin's jaw tightened. "Because I feel like I missed something important, and I don't know how to fix it." "Perhaps," she said coolly, "you can't." The music ended. They stepped apart, bowing. Her curtsy was flawless. Her face was unreadable. Colin opened his mouth, then closed it again, watching as she turned and walked away, skirts whispering over the marble floor. Later that evening, as Tabitha made polite conversation with an older gentleman about garden architecture of all things, she spotted Colin again, this time in discussion with Lady Stanton herself. He gestured subtly toward Tabitha, brow furrowed. Lady Stanton looked mildly surprised, then smiled indulgently and whispered something in return. "He's asking about me," Tabitha realized. She didn't know whether to be pleased or annoyed. As she watched, Colin accepted a glass of wine from a passing footman, but he didn't drink. He merely stood there, eyes moving across the room like he was searching for something. "Searching for me," she thought, startled. But why? Because he felt guilty? Or because he wanted to undo the damage? Or, and this possibility disturbed her most, because he was intrigued by the change and not by her at all. Back in her room that night, she wrote to Blythe by candlelight, "Dearest Blythe, he remembers me, and I wish he didn't. I don't know what I want him to see when he looks at me. The new girl in pearls, or the old one with ink on her fingers. It shouldn't matter, but it does." She paused, then scribbled, "Also, London oranges taste like disappointment." She folded the letter, sealing it with the little pressed marigold emblem the Duchess had given her for wax. Across town, Colin Hensley sat in his study with a glass of brandy and a troubled mind. He remembered that fair. He remembered the shy girl trailing behind the group, eyes bright as she held a wrapped book from the poetry stall. He remembered mocking laughter, careless words, and how she'd vanished before he could explain or apologize. He had written to her 3 letters, all returned unopened, his mother's handwriting sharp across the front. Not suitable correspondence. And now, here she was, transformed, elegant, guarded. He'd thought he wanted to revisit the past, but what he wanted now was to know her again, if she would let him. The Evermere Garden Party was the most anticipated daytime event of the spring. Now, under the care of Lady Lila Hensley, newly married and radiant in a lilac ethereal gown, the grounds were blooming with roses, hedges trimmed like lace, and tables of chilled lemonade. Tabitha had arrived late on purpose. She told herself it was to avoid a crowd, but truly, she wanted time to breathe to exist outside of ballrooms and expectations. The afternoon sun was kinder than candlelight. The birds didn't whisper behind their fans. She was halfway through a cup of lemonade when she spotted Colin, not in tails, but in a soft purple waistcoat. He was laughing politely at something Jamie Hensley said, then shaking hands. His cravat was slightly loosened. He looked less polished, more real. She stepped behind a flowering trellis before he saw her. "You'll suffocate in that corner," came a warm voice. Lila, smiling knowingly, handed her a plate of sugared strawberries. "He's not as terrifying as he used to be, you know." Tabitha flushed. "Who?" Lila only winked. There's a maze out back if you want peace. Fewer onlookers, more roses. Tabitha hesitated, but eventually nodded her thanks. The rose maze was overgrown in the prettiest way. Bees hummed lazily, and sunlight dappled the gravel paths. She wandered until she reached the center, where a marble bench sat half in shadow. She let herself sit, tugging her gloves off finger by finger, grateful for the quiet. "Miss Granger?" She jumped. Colin stood at the entrance, holding a book. "Forgive me. I didn't mean to startle you." "You didn't. Much," she said, heart thumping. "I thought I saw you come this way." "And you followed?" "I hoped for a quieter conversation," he said. This seemed fairer ground. Tabitha gestured to the bench. "Very well." He sat beside her, not too close. For a moment, neither spoke. "I remember you liked books," he said finally, holding one up. "I brought this." She blinked. "Whispers in Wild Fields," a slim volume of pastoral poetry. "We read it together," he said, "at the fair, when we were 12? 13, she said softly. "You lent me your copy," he said. "I ruined it." "Spilled cider on page 46, she recalled, a faint smile touching her lips. He laughed. "You do remember." "I remember what mattered," she murmured. Colin's expression sobered. "I've thought about that day more than I care to admit. You called me unremarkable. I was showing off. I regret it." She looked away. "Words can't be unspoken." "No," he said, "but they can be replaced." He opened the book. Inside the front cover, in neat ink, was a line from one of the poems. "The smallest flower held in a careful hand becomes immortal." Beneath it was a tiny sketch of a marigold. Tabitha's breath caught. "I remember you pressed them in all your books," he said. "This one fell out when you dropped it that day." She didn't speak. "Couldn't really. I thought if I gave this back, maybe it would remind you that I did see you," he said, "even if I was too much a fool to admit it." She traced the drawing with one finger. "You never returned my letters," he added. Tabitha's head lifted sharply. "What letters?" Colin looked startled. "3 of them, after the fair. I wrote to apologize." "My mother said you declined reply." Her brow furrowed. "I never received a single one." There was silence. Then he cursed under his breath. She intercepted them. "Why?" "She didn't think you were suitable," he said bitterly. "She was wrong. She is wrong." Tabitha stared at the marigold. "I never stopped thinking about you," he said quietly. "I don't know if that's a compliment or a burden," she said, voice trembling. "It's meant to be honest." She met his gaze. Gone was the polished party guest. This was the boy who'd offered her a sugar stick in the rain, who'd once traded her a poem for a turn on the Ferris wheel. "I don't know who you are anymore," she said, "and I'm not sure you know me either." Colin nodded once. "Then let me try." He stood, placing the book beside her on the bench. "No more cleverness, no more show. Just truth, when you're ready." And then he left. Tabitha sat in the rose maze for a long time, the book warm against her palm. "My dearest Blythe," Tabitha wrote late that night, sprawled at her borrowed writing desk with her slippers kicked off and a plate of lemon biscuits half eaten beside her. "Today I was chased into a rose maze by a man with better cheekbones than memory, carrying a book of poetry like a white flag. Dramatic, I know, but you asked for stories, and I must deliver." She grinned, biting her lip as her pen hovered over the page. "Also, I may have nearly cried over a sketch of a marigold, which is as ridiculous as it sounds. Until you remember, I used to press one into every book I owned." He remembered. "I don't know if that makes me ache or float. Possibly both. I am, as ever, hopeless." She paused. "P.S. Please remind Aunt Felicity that her corset lectures are unnecessary. I can breathe and curtsy at the same time, barely." P.P.S. Please send jam. London jam is suspiciously pale. She sealed the letter with a small wax stamp, shaped like a tiny book, and slid it aside, sighing. That evening had left her restless. Colin's visit to the Rose Maze had left behind more than just awkward charm and regret. The poetry book sat beside her, spine gently creased, marigold drawing tucked like a pressed ghost between pages. She had read it again and again, and yet, the next morning, as she stepped into the foyer on the way to her language tutor, the butler handed her a wrapped parcel. "No note, miss, just this." She unwrapped it in her room. Another book. This time, Tales for a Cottage Afternoon, a childhood collection she had adored and thought lost. Inside the cover was a torn scrap of newsprint, folded twice and tucked precisely into Chapter 3, where her favorite tale began. She unfolded it. On one side, a short review of the Evermere garden party. On the other, a scrap of her own handwriting, unmistakable, from a letter she once gave Colin on his 13th birthday, quoting a poem. "All the stars are poems. We forgot how to read." She gasped aloud. How did he? She hadn't seen that note in years. She turned the scrap over again, heart stuttering. On the corner of the book's flyleaf, beneath her finger, was a penciled doodle. Another marigold, slightly askew. She pressed a hand to her mouth. That afternoon, she strolled with her chaperone through Hyde Park, though the conversation something about embroidery trends was lost on her entirely. Her thoughts spun like the spokes of a carriage wheel. How did he find that letter? Why return it now, and why say nothing? It wasn't simply the books, it was what they represented. Memories he had no business remembering, except he had. She thought of his words in the maze. "Let me try." Was this him trying? She sent Blythe another letter that night. "Today I received another book, and with it, a memory I didn't know I'd left behind. Tell Maeve someone sees the old version of you clearly. Is it love or just impressive detective work? P.S. I think he's teasing me, gently, through books. It's horribly effective." The next morning, the Duchess of Corbridge intercepted her at breakfast, with one elegant eyebrow raised and a knowing smile. "You've been distracted." Tabitha managed a laugh. "Is it obvious?" "Painfully. I approve, by the way. Books are much safer than flirtation." Tabitha blinked. "Who said anything about flirtation?" The Duchess sipped her tea. "Darling, I've lived through 5 seasons. Anonymous poetry is always flirtation." She stood and dropped a casual hand to Tabitha's shoulder. "When you're ready to tell him what you want, do. And don't hide behind verse. Men aren't clever enough to catch subtlety, only sincerity." And with that, she swept out in a rustle of violet silk. That evening, as Tabitha sat by the window with the Tales volume open in her lap, she whispered the poem again. "All the stars are poems. We forgot how to read." She closed her eyes and let herself feel it. The warmth of memory, the ache of possibility. Someone was trying to speak her language, and she might be ready to reply. The ball at Lord Tansley's townhouse was everything society expected. Candlelight dancing off crystal chandeliers, violins soaring through waltzes, and fashionable gowns rustling like silk tides. Tabitha had attended several such gatherings since her arrival in London, but tonight felt different. She was no longer trying to disappear into wallpaper. She had been noticed, she had been remembered. And now she was wondering if she was being watched. Her gown was a striking dusky lavender trimmed in silver, borrowed from the Duchess's newer collection. It shimmered under the ballroom's golden lights. She felt like a contradiction, both dressed to be admired and determined not to be. She lingered near a potted orange tree, watching the dancers swirl past. Her aunt was somewhere gossiping near the punch. Her chaperone, Miss Aberley, had dozed discreetly in a corner. And then, "You look like a stanza in moonlight." The voice came from behind her, warm and clear. She turned. Colin Hensley stood just a step away, his expression unreadable, though there was a softness in his eyes. He looked almost unusual for him. Tabitha tilted her chin. "Is that supposed to be a compliment?" "A sincere one," he said, "though perhaps I've already overstepped." "Hard to say," she replied, folding her fan. "You have a great deal of ground to cover." He winced slightly, then offered a small bow. "May I have this dance?" She considered refusing. It would have been easier, but something in his gaze, a hesitant, uncertain, unlocked a different answer from her lips. "You may." He led her into the line. It was a country dance, and she found herself opposite him, his hands enfolding hers as they formed the set. The music began. For a moment, they simply danced. Then he spoke, voice quiet between steps. "You wore a green ribbon that day. It had a snag near the left edge." She missed a beat barely and recovered. "What day?" "At the fair, 2 summers ago." He offered a self-deprecating smile. "I saw the snag only after I said something foolish. Too late." She stared straight ahead as they switched partners, her pulse suddenly hammering. "I remember," she said softly when they returned. "I heard what you said. You called me unremarkable." His jaw tightened. "I was trying to impress idiots. I thought it didn't matter, that you hadn't heard." "I heard," she repeated, eyes steady on his. "And I remembered. I still do." The dance brought them close again. He whispered, "I've regretted it ever since." She inhaled sharply, then exhaled. "You didn't know me." "I didn't try to," he said. "That's worse." Their hands joined in a turning step. She let him feel the sting of silence a moment before speaking again. "And now?" "Now I see you," he said simply. "And I'd be a fool not to." The music began its final round. Couples dipped and turned. "You've changed," she said, watching him. "You used to swagger." "I still do, in private," he said, and she startled a laugh. "Maybe a little," she allowed. He leaned in, not too close, but close enough that only she could hear. "If I could rewrite what I said that day, I would. I would call you thoughtful, fierce, impossible to overlook." Tabitha's steps faltered, just once, just slightly. He steadied her with a touch. She blinked at him, her throat tightening. "You say that now, but I wonder if you mean it." "I do," he said, his voice low, "and I hope you'll let me prove it." The music ended. They bowed to one another. "Thank you," she said politely, and turned away before he could speak again. Later, in the carriage home, the Duchess gave her an approving smile before dozing off beside her, bonnet askew. The city rolled past the window like a dream. Tabitha opened her reticule, pulled out a folded scrap of paper, and scribbled on the back of a dance card, "You say you see me now, but why does it still feel like you're only looking at the light around me?" She tucked the note into her poetry book and said nothing more. The sun had just begun to slip behind the rooftops when the bell rang. The parlor was cool and quiet, the day's mail scattered on a silver tray. Tabitha sat by the window with a book in her lap. Though she hadn't turned a page in 10 minutes, her thoughts lingered not on poetry, but on the words Colin had spoken at Lord Tansley's ball. "If I could rewrite what I said that day, I would." She had almost believed him. Almost. Footsteps approached. "Miss Tabitha," the housekeeper murmured from the doorway, a note of surprise in her voice. "You have a caller." "The Duchess is not in," Tabitha said automatically. "Yes, miss, he asked for you." Tabitha's heart stilled. Then it pounded. Moments later, Colin Hensley stood in the front drawing room, hat in hand, curls wind-tossed from travel. His coat bore faint dust from the road. He looked not polished, but sincere and nervous. "I beg your pardon for calling unannounced," he began. "I didn't want to wait. I have something I must give you." He opened a satchel and removed a small parcel wrapped in linen string. Inside was a slim, leather-bound book of poetry weathered at the corners. Tabitha blinked. "Is this yours?" "It was," he said, "but it belonged to both of us, once." She turned the book over. Tucked inside were 3 folded letters, yellowed with age. Tabitha sat slowly, her gloved hands trembling as she reached for them. One was addressed in a boyish scrawl, "Miss Tabitha Granger, care of Willowbank Cottage." She looked up, eyes wide. "I wrote to you," Colin said. "After the fair, I didn't sleep that night. I couldn't. I wanted to apologize, to explain. I wrote again and again. But I never," she faltered, "I never received anything." He nodded. "My mother intercepted them. She didn't approve." Tabitha froze. "Of me?" "Of anyone outside our circle," he said quietly. "She'd seen me speaking with you that day. I tried to defend what I said poorly, but she guessed what it meant. She burned the first letter and returned the others to my desk." He looked down, jaw tight. "I thought you didn't want to hear from me, that you'd thrown them away." Her hands tightened around the pages. "And I thought you'd confirmed everything I feared about myself." He looked up sharply. "No, Tabitha, no." She opened the top letter. Inside, in slanted ink, were his clumsy yet earnest words. "I said something I didn't mean. I said it to impress others, and all it did was shame me. You were kind and bright-eyed, and you didn't deserve any of it. If I could go back, I would do that day over. I would walk with you instead. I hope someday you'll let me." She read the others. One had a pressed marigold tucked inside. Another mentioned the poem they once shared beneath the apple tree at the summer fete. Tears pricked her eyes. "You kept them," she whispered. "I couldn't forget you," he said. "No matter how I tried to convince myself, I had to. You haunted mine every quiet room, every unfinished poem." She glanced down at the book again. "Why now? Why give these to me after all this time?" "Because I want you to know the truth," Colin said. "No masks, no riddles, no flirtations. Just this: I never stopped caring for you. I just wasn't brave enough to fight for you back then." She looked at him for a long, breathless moment. "And now, I'm here," he said simply, "if you'll let me be." There was a silence, rich and heavy with all they hadn't said. Then Tabitha nodded once, slowly and gently closed the book of poetry in her lap. "I'm not the girl from Willowbank anymore," she murmured. "I know," Colin replied, "but she's still part of you, and I'd like to get to know her again, along with the remarkable woman you've become." Later that evening, Tabitha sat at her writing desk beneath the slant of fading sunlight and wrote in her journal. The final ball of the London season was always the grandest. Hosted by the Countess of Albridge in her legendary mirrored ballroom, it marked the closing curtain on months of flirtation, strategy, scandal and, for some, transformation. Tabitha stepped down from the carriage slowly, the Duchess clucking with excitement beside her. The footman offered a hand, but she hardly noticed. Her breath had caught in her throat. Tonight, she chose to wear the blue gown she had worn at the first ball, and the Duchess decided to do the same as well. The neckline framed her collarbones modestly, but the cut was elegant, grown-up, things she hadn't noticed previously due to nervousness. The Duchess had insisted she wear her hair pinned up to show her graceful neckband tonight. Tabitha hadn't argued. Inside, gaslights glowed like stars overhead. Footmen carried silver trays. Guests shimmered in pearls and polished shoes. The room smelled faintly of roses and champagne. "Gracious," the Duchess murmured. Do you see the crowd? And, oh, there's Lady Fairwick, don't let her corner you about her pug." Tabitha didn't hear. She was scanning the crowd, heart thudding. Then she saw him. Colin. He stood near the far wall, his hair slightly mussed, as though he'd run a hand through it too often. When their eyes met, something unspoken passed between them. Nervousness, anticipation, wonder. A hush rippled through the room as the music paused. Then came the announcement. "The first waltz," a steward boomed, "is to be opened by Miss Tabitha Granger and Mr. Colin Hensley." A flutter of fans, an audible gasp, then the hum of speculation. Tabitha's spine stiffened. She turned to the Duchess of Corbridge, scandal blooming in her chest. "We were not told," the Duchess blinked. "Two submitted your name as eligible, but I never expected." He requested it? He had. Colin was now making his way toward her, his eyes never leaving hers. He bowed. "Will you dance with me?" The room waited, watched. Tabitha inhaled slowly. "Yes," she said, "I will." The orchestra struck the opening notes. Colin led her to the center of the gleaming floor. As he placed one hand lightly at her back and took her hand in the other, he whispered, "I hope this time the words you remember are mine alone." She lifted her chin, her lips trembling between amusement and disbelief. "You certainly do make a spectacle of apologies." "Only because I got it wrong the first time." They began to move, turning gently in time with the melody. It wasn't flawless. He stepped just a hair too wide. She faltered briefly on a pivot, but it didn't matter. Something passed between them that no onlooker could name. Tabitha's eyes sparkled beneath the chandelier, her cheeks pink with emotion, not powder. He leaned in slightly. "I knew you'd shine here." "You didn't always." "I know," he said quietly, "but I see you now. Not because of the dress, or the lights, or the way the music makes everyone float, but because I never stopped seeing you, even when I thought I had to look away." Her heart twisted. "I've spent so long trying to be someone worth noticing," she murmured. Colin slowed their turn as the music shifted into its final swell. "You always were." He said it so simply, so untheatrically, that it left her breathless. The waltz ended. Applause filled the air, polite, puzzled, impressed. But none of it mattered to Tabitha, not compared to the quiet certainty in Colin's gaze. They bowed, stepped back, but did not part. She was smiling when she said, "I hope you know this doesn't mean you're forgiven entirely." "Oh, I'm counting on it," he replied with a grin. "I'll just have to keep trying." They strolled from the floor together, watched by half of London. Across the ballroom, Serena Fairchild, elegant, statuesque, with a glass of lemonade in hand, observed the scene unfold with a single arched brow. She turned to Lila, now Lady Jamie Everleigh, who beamed from a nearby chaise. "I suppose we're all in the mood for redemption this year," Serena drawled. Lila gave her a knowing look. "You never know. Even you might surprise us." Serena rolled her eyes with theatrical flair. "Oh, spare me." She tossed back the rest of her lemonade and swept away. The morning after the Albridge ball dawned soft and golden, with mist curling gently over the garden hedges of Corbridge Hall. In the small breakfast room, Tabitha sat by the window, stirring her tea, though it had long since cooled. The events of the night before played in her mind in strange, glimmering loops. The dance, the warmth in Colin's voice, the looks cast their way by half of society. It should have left her anxious. Instead, it left her calm. The Duchess of Corbridge bustled in, cheerful and smug. "Well, you've certainly caused a stir, my dear. I've already had 3 notes and 1 biscuit tin delivered, and a very flustered Viscount's daughter trying to pretend she doesn't mind losing her place on Colin Hensley's dance card." Tabitha didn't answer immediately. She touched the edge of the table, running her fingers along the grain. Did I lose myself to become the sort of woman he'd admire? Or did I finally let the real me step forward? The Duchess blinked. Why ever do you ask that? I think, Tabitha said slowly, that I needed both. Just then, the doorbell rang. A moment later, the butler entered, looking uncharacteristically pleased. Mr. Hensley is calling, miss. He asks if you'll see him in the garden. Tabitha stood, her pulse quickened, but her feet felt steady. She found him beneath the lilac arbor, his coat freshly brushed, but his tie slightly askew, as if he'd pulled at it more than once. A small bouquet of marigolds rested beside him on the bench. For courage, he said when she glanced at them. She folded her hands, wary and wondering. You've written letters, danced boldly, even requested a waltz in full view of the Tun. What is it you still need courage for? Colin took a breath. I wanted you to know that I remember everything, he said. Not just the books and flowers and summer fairs. I remember the way you listened, the way you looked at the world as if it had secrets only you could hear. You made me want to be better long before I even understood how. He paused. I came here today not to impress you or to perform but to ask, plainly and properly. May I court you, not for society's sake, not for a season, but for myself? Tabitha's throat tightened. Her gaze flicked away to the rose bushes, then back. You should have fought harder, she said quietly. Back then, I know, he replied. I was young. I listened to the wrong voices, but I'm fighting now, and I won't stop. She let the silence stretch, the soft hum of bees, the rustle of leaves, the distant clip of hooves on the street all pressed in, warm and expectant. Then Tabitha stepped forward and touched his sleeve. I'll let you, she said. Colin's brow furrowed. Let me. Court me, she clarified, lips quirking. Slowly, respectfully, and only if you keep bringing books I haven't read. His grin broke wide. I'll bring libraries. As they sat together beneath the lilacs, laughter spilling between them like shared sunlight, it was clear to both that this was not a beginning out of nowhere, but a renewal long overdue. Elsewhere, at Evermere Hall, Serena Fairchild reclined on a garden settee, twirling a parasol. Jamie was reading aloud from a newspaper, while Lila threaded blossoms into a garland. Another glowing review for Tabitha and Colin's grand waltz, Jamie mused. One publication calls them the season's quiet triumph. Triumph? Serena snorted. They danced. They swooned. She wore a gown that fit. Revolutionary. Lila grinned. You're not moved? I'm not made of sugar, Serena replied. And I've no interest in being someone's quiet triumph. Lila tilted her head. Perhaps you'll be the storm instead. Serena leaned back with a dry laugh. You always did know me too well. She plucked a bloom from Lila's garland, held it up to the light, and said softly, Fine, let the world have its love stories. I'll write my own. Like, comment, share, and subscribe for more original Regency romance stories. This is story 2 of 5 in the Season of Surprises series by StoryTunesLabX. Don't miss the next love story with a twist, coming soon.